yeah, so we had our upgrade, and the biggest change was the color of the interface, and then on the back end, our software changed. A lot of things you didn't necessarily see, but a couple of them that I'll note are the recently used assets and pages on the welcome screen. I've already used that functionality myself, so that's recently used assets and pages on the welcome screen. And then also you have the ability to search on your assets and your pages using the tab feature. And so I created a demo video that we released with that announcement, and that kind of goes into more detail about that if you have questions. And then just also as a reminder, this is how you can contact us depending on what you need. We have a request form, and those are to be used for project requests or possible content requests, any kind of reaching out that you would need, but not CMS problems. So that would be Ask ITS, and you could also call them. And so what that does is it creates a ticket. If it's something that they can troubleshoot, they'll help you with that. But if they can't, then they'll route it to us, and we'll do what needs to be done on that end. And then if something doesn't fall into that, those two are alias digital.communications. You can reach out to us there as well. And that actually goes to our entire team. So we can route it from there. So content is king is the title of our presentation today, and you guys might be familiar with that phrase, and you might not, but it's been said by Bill Gates, and Google has harped on it in previous years, and before that, Sumner Redstone of Viacom said it, but the term has even been said to be coined back in 1914. So it's not anything new. The idea behind it is that good content is what we're aiming for, and then that has a ripple effect. It's shared more, it gets people the information they need quicker, everything is better for our users, and on our end for ourselves, we're maybe not having to answer as many questions. So you're the content experts in your departments, in your units, in your schools, and with the CMS you're empowered to make changes on a whim 24/7. So that's the awesome thing about the CMS, but that's also kind of can be daunting. And everyone might have specific goals or slightly different audiences, but at the end of the day, there are definitely things that we like to recommend to make that content creation less of a burden, and make it fun if at all possible. So as a content producer, you're also a writer, you're a communicator, and these may not be words that are in your titles here at the university, but they are what you do. And so we're acknowledging that you guys are writers, web writers, and the essence of good content is good writing. There's spelling and grammar and punctuation and all that, but then there's also making content and writing sentences that are approachable and readable. And so I think the dream here is that we can all dedicate quality time to updating our content, but the reality is that it's often just an added thing to our job description. Oh, you have all these priorities, but there's also this other priority, and you often hear about that one when things are broken, right? Links are broken or something's not working. All of a sudden that immediately becomes priority number one. But there are some things that you can do to make that work for you with your time and your schedule. So that's what I'm going to talk about, some specific tools, and then Karen's going to pick up strategy points today, and then Eric's going to follow up with just a little bit about analytics and the NYU.edu stats and trends, some things that we've seen over the years that I find personally very interesting, so I think you guys will find relevant too. So we've all been there, and and this gentleman's issue is probably related to the computer. As you can see, it looks like a hunk of metal. But it is never our intention as content creators to put people through pain when they, are using our website or stress people out. But sometimes the reality of the situation is that we're trying to cram a lot into a little space. And so this is just a constant battle. We're always going to have a lot of information. We're going to have to narrow it down and figure out what makes sense and what is accessible. So we all have it in our power to make the web world, a better place, one well-written sentence at a time and one easily scannable page at a time. And so let's get into some tools about how we can do that. So the CMS is great, for many reasons, but it often falls short when it comes to tracking changes and adding author and edit comments. So we have two roles in the CMS. We have an author and approver role, so that's a great way to kind of, track down changes and make sure things aren't being activated without approval. But, how do we track those changes and add comments and things like that? And in our recent survey, when we did the RSVP, I asked you guys what were some burdens, some barriers to updating your content. And two things came out on top, both evenly. One was lack of time, and the other one was having many channels to approve that content. These are things that we deal with as well, and so we have some things that some tools that we use in our own department. Annotations are something that have been in the CMS for quite some time, but they're kind of nondescript, and we tend to forget about them. But they're a great way to just add some notes to a pre-existing component. The way you would add them is any component on the page that is has the ability to be right-clicked. You'll right-click and you'll select Annotate. It'll open up a little sticky note. They look like this. You can change the color using the little wheel color icon. You can draw using the little squiggle icon. It also notes who made that note with the net ID at the bottom. If you hover over that net ID, you're going to see the time and date that was made. So for example, you could also create a color scheme for these annotations. Maybe it makes sense for you to have notes that are suggestions in yellow and things that have to be changed in red and ideas in green or something like that. So you can play with it. Or maybe you just really like the color turquoise. So it is a little bit customizable, and it can be used. I use it personally to visually remind myself that that's a component that I need to update. Like that's the master component because I have it referenced on many other pages. So the shortcuts component where you have many links that you may be updating or adding to, referencing that on other pages is great because you only have to update in one place. So I create a little sticky note saying like, this is the master component, add new links here. And I've seen other people use it to say this page has not been activated yet, as a visual reminder that this content is being prepped or waiting for a certain date to go live. Especially when you have multiple people touching your pages, it's just a good visual right off the bat. Version control is one of my favorite things, and there's a couple of things that you should know about version control. So it's available in the Sidekick, so once you're in edit mode, you can create a version, you can add a comment to it, and once you select create version, underneath restore version, you're going to see that newly created. If you hover over it, you'll be able to see the comments that you left for yourself. Another thing you should know is that every time you activate a page, a version is automatically created for you. What's nice about this is manually creating the versions. You could have your page as is, go and create a version saying this is the original page, play with it, mess with it, and then if you didn't like anything you can restore that version without having to duplicate your work time and put everything back in its place. So these are great.
Is your working pretty reliably now?
Sorry.
It's worked. The only time that version control sometimes will be lost is in a process of an upgrade. And so people who are keeping versions for many months at a time, those things may not stay around because of part of the upgrade process. We try to identify that in advance when we know, but generally it works. From time to time, there'll be corrupt files, nodes, little things here and there, but that's an uncommon occurrence.
Right.
Really?
Okay.
Well, I mean, I did 6 versions yesterday.
Okay.
And it wouldn't let, and I wanted to restore to like the version when they started, but it wouldn't only let me go back 3 or 4 versions, and then it just kept restoring. I couldn't get back to
Yeah.
We'll have to look into that. If you see you can do any screenshots or any more details, you want to send that into Ask ITS or to our alias. That's new. I've not heard about that.
Yeah, if you do experience issues with it, the best ways when you do contact Ask ITS is include the URL. It can be the CMS author URL, and then our developers can go in and look at the code and make sure nothing is wrong.
Of course, the problem was I made changes 6 times and activated 6 new pages.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
It should be working
Before I
still
realized
through
I
that.
screwed up.
Yeah.
Right.
I do it all the time. Don't worry.
So the other thing that is a limitation to version control is that our system only saves the last 140 versions or up to 14 months of those versions. So if you had like something you hadn't activated in a while, commencement's a good example because we changed that page and we work with university events to change that page. It doesn't change all that much. The content does, but in terms of the layout and things like that, after a year, we have to be careful of not being able to roll back that far. Google Docs are a great collaboration tool. We all know that we're a Google Apps school and we have this at our fingertips, but they can be, in my personal experience, kind of clunky to work with. However, I took the ITS course about Google Apps and specifically the Google Docs, and I would highly recommend it to learn more about the functionality because there are a lot of things hidden and a lot of tools hidden that do make it a lot easier. One thing that I really love seeing is the revision history. So sometimes you have many channels of approval. Maybe they have access to the CMS, but they don't want to go into it. It's too much of a learning curve, or they don't have the time. But if you have specific edits, specifically like language or tone, just a copy of a website, you could have it in a Google Doc, get that approved, and then be able to drop that into the CMS when you're ready. One thing that I will remind and reiterate is if you do copy and paste the text into the text component, use that clipboard tool to strip the formatting. And that's paste as text. It's just a little clipboard. It's inside the component itself. Otherwise, it will break the component. We'll have to unlock it. It's not the end of the world, but it would put a kink in your workflow. And then the other thing that we've created, oh yes.
I'm sorry, is there any possibility that would ever, like, where you copy and paste and it would save the formatting?
So if it did save the formatting, yes, that's possible, but what would happen is the component would be uneditable. So even though you would...
No, I know.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying where you could successfully be like, I have edited this on Google Doc, and you copy and paste it into the CMS, and hit activate, and it would, as opposed to having to go in and be like, rebold,
Oh, right. So
what's actually happening is you're using two different tools, and whether it be Word Doc or copying from another website or Google Doc, whatever it might be, they're using different techniques to style the copy.
Right, I understand.
And so what happens is when you copy and paste that, you just paste it into the CMS. You're pasting in usually that markup in the background, and a lot of times that markup is not the same that the CMS uses, and it'll conflict. So it's possible that they could be the same, and then if you save it, it's okay. It'll keep your formatting. Everything's great, wonderful. But a lot of times they're different. And so sometimes that code that you're secretly copying and pasting in the background you can't see necessarily will conflict, and then things will just kind of lock up.
Right. And Blogger just did that where they aligned whatever that XML. So like when you copy from a Google Doc, when you copy from a Word document into Blogger, it doesn't. When you copy from Google Doc,
it helps when you're the same company doing the same code. Right. Yeah, unfortunately, Adobe is not necessarily focused on that specific aspect. It's something that we always look at to try to improve. Yeah, it would be easier for all of us, ourselves included, to just say, this rich text editor knows how to strip out all unnecessary formatting or change the formatting to what it needs to have to store. So that's something we're always looking at, but it's something that is, because all those editors outside the world are uncontrollable and changing all the time, it needs like almost a full-time developer just on that alone to keep on top of it. So the chances are pretty slim that we'll have a tool that's that easy. If we could get Google to just solve all the problems or somebody else for us, that would be great, and we'd happily adopt that. But
one thing I think would be really lovely is if you could copy and paste out of a CMS page, even into another position on the page, and maintain the formatting. That
Sometimes that works. I've done that.
Really?
I don't necessarily advise it, but I've done it on accident and it's worked.
Yeah, I tend to lose the formatting when I do that. Yeah, and you lose the links too, which I find the most irritating. You know, especially if there's several.
Right. Yeah, that's a hard one. If you copy and paste, what I've done it saves me a little bit of time. It's debatable if it's worth it, but mentally it makes me feel better. Is I will copy and paste the entire, let's say it's a paragraph, and that formatting is already there. So instead of going into the component and selecting the paragraph and opening a new component, I copy the component and I paste the component. It duplicates the component. Nothing changes.
Oh, so you can duplicate the component?
Yes, by copying, if you right click and paste it.
Really?
There are certain components that do not allow that. Off the bat, I can think about the audio component, for example, doesn't allow that. I don't think the video component does, but there are quite a few.
That's great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. So that can save a little bit of time.
Sure.
First of all, I'm like totally not a techie person. Assigned to this. So
Yeah.
Tag you're in.
But anyway, when I copy content and I put it somewhere else, I always get this weird thing where before or maybe it's after a period in a sentence, it says like NS.
Non-breaking.
Okay. So what that means is in HTML, when you use the ampersand and a couple characters after that, it's usually an ampersand, a couple characters, and then a semicolon. That piece, whatever's in the middle, dictates a special character. So that could be a right angle quote, a dagger, it could be a space. So the NBSP stands for non-breaking space. And so that means in some programs that if you want to make sure you have extra space in there, you have to insert that code in the background, because some browsers, if it sees like 4 or 5 spaces, it just ignores everything after the first one. So if you want to make sure there's extra space, then it has to put that code in there. So sometimes when you copy and paste, that's something that came from the background of one program. And then if you put it in and paste as text, sometimes it turns it into that text. You can just erase it. It's not anything that's going to hurt, but that's what it is. Yeah, there's a whole series. It's called ASCII text. And so there's a whole series of codes and things, and they have letter codes and they have number codes, and it's crazy. If you really want to read up on it, that's what it is.
You have to like accents if you need like a word from another language, like an accent or something. They're also, it's especially
In front of you guys, and then for those online, it's part of the materials for the go-to training is the strategic content worksheet. And this is something we created. We kind of always done this, but not in a worksheet format, right? So we've asked ourselves these questions, but now we put it down on paper. And we've created a Word doc template. So the piece that you have in front of you, if you write it in, it's not going to move for you and make it bigger, but we're going to make this available for you after the session. And what it is it's just a guide. So when you're putting in new content and you're trying to really imagine what is it going to say and what are we trying to get across here, it's just a great guide to point you in the right direction and possibly even align you with some of the other key people in your department. And so you know the expectations for what they want on the website as well. And some other tips too is just consider reserving half an hour a week on your Google Calendar so no one else can take it from you to look at your website and look over the content and make iterative changes. That's one of the biggest mistakes we see departments make is it piles up quickly, right? We all know that. There's all of a sudden, one little change. Oh, we'll get to that later. And then there's 2, 3, and it piles up. And then before we know it, it's going to take a team of people to make updates. And often it doesn't even happen at that point. So we're all just kind of getting by the skin of our teeth and we're, trying to make it. But just carving out that time is something that I know we do, but it is hard to prioritize. And even for the CMS tutorials with the upgrade recently, we made different iterative changes. Priority 1 was to update all screenshots. They were blue. Now we have a green system. It's a glaring, difference. Priority, so that was priority 1, and then priority 2 was to make them easier to navigate. Personally, I found that they were kind of all over the place, and we'd had some feedback from you guys that they could be better. And then priority 3, which is ongoing, is to rewrite them and rework them and make them easier and add videos and all kinds of things. And team member Trisha down there, she has a great background in writing these kinds of tutorials. So I want to pull on her knowledge, and that requires, a lot of time so we can coordinate schedules. So those are like, nitty gritty tools to creating content, but then there's inspiration. And I feel like, this is also kind of what keeps our heads up, during the hard times of content creation, because it can be really difficult. But Karen found this great Tumblr, Diary of a Content Strategist. It's a mix of fun, memes, and humor about content creation, but also has great real world links, examples to articles. It's a great mix of stuff. And then Content Strategy for the Web. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It's a short read, great, very inspiring. Letting Go of the Words is another one that Karen recommends, and it's more about the writing.
That right now.
Okay, awesome. So there you go. And then Confab, conferences are a great way to get inspired about creating content. Confab had their first higher ed specific conference this last year. Karen and I attended, and it was probably the best conference I've been to. And I would highly recommend, trying to get the funding to go to a conference, or even attend it via a Twitter hashtag. You can learn a lot if you just follow a conference's hashtag. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karen to talk to us about strategy.
So many of you selected lack of time as the top reason that's preventing you from updating your content. We often encounter authors who, after not having time to maintain and sort of make their updates to their pages, they just want to scrap everything and they want to redo their pages, start from scratch. Sometimes it's not the best option. It's time consuming. It's potentially very stressful. If you are having time management problems before, that's definitely not going to help anyone. So having a content strategy will help you identify your content, develop timelines, and initiate sort of an iterative approach that Cassie mentioned to maintaining your content. It also helps you create and maintain online content that's relevant and that evolves with your users' changing needs and interests. This is a slide that I recreated. It's originally by Rick Allen, who is at ePublish Media, who works exclusively advising higher ed institutions. I really like this slide because it reminds you that your audience is at the center of all this. And the reason you're creating content is you want to attract them, you want to inform them, you want to engage them. And then ultimately, you want to retain them. You want them to come back because your content has meaning for them and they're able to find what they want to find. Sometimes we become so focused on the work that we do and how we present it that we lose sight about who our audience is and what their needs are. So remember, your audience will choose what content they want to access, when they want to access it, and how they want to access it. We don't get to control that experience for them. We can only facilitate that experience by providing them with sincere, readable content. So to kind of help you achieve quality content, we've put together a 5-step guide that will help you begin to think about your content creation strategically. Number 1 is we recommend that you start to prioritize your goals. When you start thinking about refreshing your current pages or building out new pages from scratch, begin by listing all the content you want to include. You can use the strategic content worksheet that Cassie just went over to define your business goals, identify your audience needs, and to begin to organize your content priorities. You can look for patterns and start to think about the solutions that you'll need to implement. Defining your priorities in writing will help you focus on your top must-have content. It will also illuminate content that is lower in priority and can be developed later. Perhaps you'll never get around to developing, and I want to let you know that happens and it's okay. It's low priority. Don't stress out over things that are low priority. Really concentrate on things that are at the top of your list. Step 2 is start to identify your content. And this is something that I oftentimes do at the same time as prioritizing, so sort of work concurrently. If you have existing web pages, documents, videos, or other content assets, you need to identify them. And the content inventory, which it's a little hard to see over there, but I have an example of one, and there's also a link towards the bottom from Brain Traffic, where it's Christina Halverson. She wrote the book that Cassie mentioned, the content strategy for the web. She goes into great depth about content inventories and has a great example of how to build them. But basically, a content inventory is a great tool for capturing sort of the information There's nothing glamorous about a content inventory. It's just you, a spreadsheet, and the task of cataloging everything. And I mean like everything. The good news is that after you do it once, it becomes like a living document. You can add to it and edit it as your content continues to change. And it's a great way to track those changes. And it also will help you like document what your strategy is so that you can pass it on to other CMS authors who may eventually take over those web pages. So it sort of facilitates transfer of knowledge. After you've inventoried your content, you can use this document to audit it. Ask yourself, what content do you want to keep? What content do you want to delete? And what content do you want to update? Also ask yourself what content is missing and determine who will be responsible for creating that content. You can mark all of this in the content inventory and you can use it as your content blueprint. So after writing the content that needs updating, after identifying the content that needs updating and the content that needs to be created, it's time to start writing it. The inverted pyramid style of writing has endured the test of time, and it's what we recommend how you organize your content on a page. The technique basically front loads. So you think of a pyramid, it's like sort of inverted, so heavy on the top, goes into a point at the bottom. It front loads the content so that the most important information is placed at the top of the page. Supporting details will follow in sort of that middle section, and then sort of where you start funneling in is the background and general information towards the end. Now it can be really tempting. I think from school we all learned to sort of start by explaining what we were doing, stating our thing. So you want to start with background and general information, but resist that urge. Get to the point and just tell the audience what they need to know and what they want to know. Secondly, avoid jargon and acronyms. Only you understand that. No one else understands it. Use small words and short, direct sentences, statements. Less is always more. And then use formatting to make your information scannable on a page. You can use headings, subheadings to organize your content. You can use bulleted lists, use text formatting like bold and italics when appropriate, and use images that enrich the meaning of your writing, and you use tables for displaying data. Now on the side there is a tool that a content strategist named Laura Creekmore recommends. Basically, she says take a chunk of your content and then delete every 6th word and then give it to somebody and ask them to fill in those blanks. If they can fill in the blanks, you're doing a good job. If they can't and they don't know what's going on, you probably need to rethink what you're writing. And I found that to be a really useful tool to use.
Be careful on the formatting though. Oftentimes I see a lot of over formatting, trying to bring emphasis. So just be careful. If you find you're over formatting, then maybe rethink your priorities, because you should use formatting for emphasis and scannability. So it's okay to have a paragraph of text that's not formatted, and use your headers sparingly, but make sure it's scannable, make sure you're not trying to screen everything off of your page.
Because I think a lot of formatting can just be like very distracting.
So personalize it. Voice and tone is all the rage right now. We know that site viewers respond better to sincere and quality content than to contrived messaging. They respond to a conversational tone rather than to a bureaucratic, impersonal tone. They respond to content that has personality. So recently, the NYU Visual Identity Division of Advertising and Publishing presented the NYU Identity Language Guide. The guide is a collaboration between an outside consultant group and the NYU Visual Identity Group. And I think a lot of the recommendations they have in this guide can be applied to writing on the web. We're beginning to shift away from the very classical formal tone that universities tend to use, and we're trying to go towards what I would consider a more approachable conversational tone. Your tone may need to shift according to the occasion. It may not be appropriate to use an informal tone for serious announcements, but at the same time, there's no need to bloat that announcement with really stilted formal language that invokes a bureaucratic kind of authority. As you begin to consider tone, you also begin to develop the voice of your writing. And the guide recommends that you embrace a voice that is spontaneous, sociable, expressive, professional, wired, responsible, ambitious. That seems like a lot of things. basically, when you start writing, really, you start thinking about your writing and you write, it becomes natural, and you start to sort of, don't sit there and think about all these things. Just kind of let your own sort of personal voice flow, but keep these things in the back of your head. Am I sounding bureaucratic and standoffish, or am I talking to somebody as I would in this room?
So we want to use words like our and we when we're talking about our office at the university, right? Because the attorney in my unit says otherwise, which makes it sound very.
We don't want to use
Right.
legal.
No,
legalese.
thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely not legal.
This is being recorded right now.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Happy to have a conversation and point anybody to the person that can help with this month.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the one thing I do want to kind of point out is jokes don't equal personality. I think that's a pitfall that a lot of people make. They think, while humor is is really awesome, you don't need to force irreverence. You don't need to be like, oh, like bran muffins are awesome, because you think they'll be funny and off the cuff. Remember that humor is subjective and it has the potential to confuse people or even offend people. So keep it light. Don't feel the need to, force that sort of silliness on people, because it doesn't always go over too well.
Two quick things that help with this. I always try to coach people is, think about who your ideal reader, site viewer is for your content. And it may be different depending on the different sections of your page, or it may be an aggregate of a couple different roles. It could be a student and a parent. But imagine a person, and and really have a complete picture of that person. How would you talk to that person? How would they actually hear what you're saying if you phrase something differently? And then put that down and get that in your mind, and then write for that person for your content, either in that section or in all of your sections that you might have online. That really helps you to understand your personality and your tone, especially using this guide. This guide is the first that NYU's ever had, and it's many, many years of history. This is our very first language guide, and something that I just want to let you guys all know, this guide is going to directly inform the tone of writing for everything recruitment, everything for global study abroad, for all the major publications and all of the major recruitment and major pieces that are seen and professionally done across the university rather than just being part of somebody's job, like a lot of the stuff is for many of us. So there's going to be an expectation in the next few years by incoming students and students seeing this language and seeing this guide influence that writing. So if we don't follow this and keep this in mind, employees as well, you're going to be breaking down an expectation and not matching expectations. So I highly encourage you guys to look at this guide if you haven't seen this, didn't know about it. It's going to be very useful and really helpful.
You can find a copy of it at NYU.edu/style guide.
Does it talk about what language to use when you're describing global studies?
Yeah, it's similar. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily give you a key like you'd have on a map of what do we call Florence,
right.
What do we call Abu Dhabi, but it does make very clear never use the acronym GNU. It's an animal. It's not something that anybody in the world ever understands, even us internally at NYU. If you're going to use Global Network University, fine. It gives some specific ways in which you can use it, but generally don't use that. It doesn't make sense to anybody. It's confusing. We just need to talk about NYU. Our identity is global. It's NYU. We don't have to keep saying things. We can demonstrate in other ways. Don't use acronyms like NYU.SH or NYU.AD. It doesn't make sense. People have to learn something. Just say Abu Dhabi. Just say Abu Dhabi. Just say Shanghai. Just say the location. We all know what that means. Study abroad, study away. Study away is something that we understand at NYU, and we want to indoctrinate people to understanding, because you might not be going away if you're based in New York City going to DC. That's abroad. That's not abroad. That's away. But you know what? The rest of the world and what you're going to see online is going to be abroad, because there's a lot of external people that don't know us, that know study abroad. And so we're swimming upstream if we use terminology only of away on our websites when the world is going to be doing Google searches for study abroad. So, the guide really talks to a lot of these things that have been very confusing recently in the past few years and helps to give some guidance there. So I highly encourage that. Sorry, the only other thing I was going to say in tandem to the jokes do not necessarily equal personality is if you ever want to work on your writing and this personality, but you feel like people in your office or people you report to aren't buying it or saying, no, we need to change it. You've got that person that wants the legalese and you report to them so you don't get to tell them no. One argument that really defends, and nobody can argue, and this is something that the AVP of Marketing Communications for the university constantly tells everybody, is that brevity equals respect. If you can't be brief and get your point across very quickly and succinctly and clearly, you're not respecting somebody's time, because you're asking them to have to learn something else, to go someplace else, And so if we use jargon, if we use a lot of words, if we're saying things not in that inverted pyramid, we're not being brief. So brevity does equal respect. It doesn't mean that we don't communicate. You say everything you need to say, but you say it as brief and succinctly and clearly as possible. And that is respectful to all of our audiences and all people that we're trying to serve.
And just in the essence of time, I'll sort of gloss over chunk it. I just want you to see my chunk your blog, so I really like that. Basically, it's the idea of if you have a Word document and you copy and paste it into the CMS, it's a big blob of text that's right there. If you start to chunk up and you find relationships between your content, you add headers, you start sort of associating content and chunking it, so to speak, building the page as a modular entity with smaller building blocks to create the whole. You're going to increase your readability. You're going to facilitate the use of the reference component, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. I won't get into it. If you have questions, I can answer them maybe later. And then it prepares for the future of adaptive content, which is nothing that's happening at the moment. And it's something that you can look into if you're interested. So I won't get into it, like I said, for time's sake, but prepare for the future by chunking.
So by chunking, do you mean rather than having like all the page copy in one?
In like one rich text editor, you would break it up.
You break it up into segments.
Well, and keep in mind it's that for you as a content author CMS user, but for a site viewer, you might insert headers. So instead of having 7 paragraphs on a page with only a page title and then 7 paragraphs of body copy, you might have some subheaders, because if you're making 1.7 paragraphs, okay, that may be a problem in and of itself. But most likely you're making multiple points. So sometimes calling out those points with subheaders that can be smaller, that can be summarized in 2 to 5 words, then somebody who's looking for a specific aspect can come to your page and then quickly scan those headers and say, oh, that's the one I want, and jump right to the middle and read just that paragraph they need. Again, you're respecting them by allowing them to scan and jump and chunking your stuff and making it clear.
And then if you chunk it in the CMS, that makes it easier for you. So that whole time management thing, it's like you're not going to have to sit around and futz around because you have a header in the middle of a bunch of text and everything else is trying to format to that header too. If you're chunking it and putting it in, it just makes it faster and easier for you to edit. And those are sort of the points we had. I just wanted to end with this quote from our goddess, Christina Halverson. Quality relevant content can't be spotted by an algorithm. You can't subscribe to it. You need people, actual human beings, to create and curate it. It's just, we get caught up in technology, so it's important to remember that we're humans creating content for humans.
So you really like to put content strategy for the web?
Yes.
Oh yeah. If we haven't said it enough. So lastly, Eric's going to go over some analytics discussion, and then I know you guys submitted some questions, so we'll get into those. I don't think we'll have any time for new questions today, but my email, and you can contact us too.
So a lot of times in your site content, you want to know how successful you're doing. There's no silver bullet that's going to make this easy, but analytics can sometimes help you understand where people are going, what they're doing. And so the institutional kind of analytics tool that you all have access to is called Urchin. To go visit that, it's NYU.edu/stats. If you have a CMS account or an i4 web server account, you should have access to that. If you don't, when you get to that page, if you go to NYU.edu/stats, there's an email address. For some reason, you can't log in. Just write that email address. We'll get you access right away, and it'll match to either the site or the section that you're in. From there, you can get a lot of information. I'll note the interface looks very old. It works and gives you stats. It's actually what Google purchased to become the latest version of Google Analytics. So at some point, we'll probably upgrade the tool. We'll have a different tool, more analytics. But for the work that we're generally doing, this should solve a lot of your needs. But I highly recommend if you haven't checked it out, check it out. There's a couple tips though in terms of analytics that I common pitfalls I see a lot of people go through. Not understanding the difference between page views and unique page views. So the difference is a page view is every time I hit refresh, that's a page view. So if I'm hitting a page and I'm refreshing it 7 times, I'm going to skew results. So you don't necessarily always want to count page views by themselves. You want to look for unique page views because that's more likely a person actually visiting and the reality of what you're trying to get for behavior in terms of content. So that's something just to keep in mind. And keep in mind percentages. So every tool and digital piece, everything is flawed. the internet went down for a second, or your page didn't fully load before you moved on to another page. So analytics tracking things may not always work 100% of the time. But so if you're trying to track actual numbers and you're saying, oh my gosh, I only had one person visit this page in the last 6 months, I don't know that I ever trust any analytics tool to say that that actual number is 100% accurate. I look at percentages. Percentages are almost statistically always right on. So whatever your time period, if you have a sizable time period that you're looking at, you're saying, okay, so this page got less than 1% traffic. I think that's safe to say you're probably not getting a lot of traffic. It's something to reimagine. Do you need that page? Is it easier to get rid of that page because it's just work to keep up but nobody's using it? Or is it that one legal statement that we have to have up there for compliance and nobody goes to it, but we have it up there? That one regulator sees it, you know? That's a way to help kind of view things. So keep in mind, percentages are usually better than numbers. If you have a very specific goal and you've seen, you know, month over month over month, the numbers are about the same, and you want to increase the numbers to a certain page, then numbers can matter a little bit more than the percentages. But keep in mind that those numbers may not be 100% accurate to how many people, how many visits you actually got, but it's close. Percentages will get you there most of the way. So understanding your audience, understanding NYU's audience is sometimes really important. I hear a lot of people also across the university say, oh, this article said, you know, this is what's happening in the world. And so, oh my gosh, we're so far behind. We've got to change everything we do. I'm going to put on the brakes for a minute and I'll share some things. So one example of that is mobile devices. So these stats are from last year, not necessarily this current year yet, but iOS has represented about, that's iPhones, iPod Touches, everything like that, anything Apple mobile, 79.81% of mobile devices. That's our largest share of mobile devices have been iOS. But a lot of web-wide surveys, things across the globe say that iOS is at only about 55% of the share. So that's a significant difference. I once heard an Apple rep say that we are the largest consumers of Apple products out of any U.S. institution. I don't know if that's still true. I don't know if that's an Apple rep just, you know, trying to get in good and get us to buy more things. I don't know, but we do have a lot of Apple devices, and it is kind of been shown in studies that iOS devices in the U.S. in large urban populations were more popular. It's a fashion accessory, and so that got adopted really early. And once somebody's adopted, they tend to stick with it because they don't want to change. So we have a much higher percentage here on much of our traffic. So a lot of our audiences in other locations might also be using those same devices. Things to note. Other things that I think are really interesting and important to know is that the majority of the traffic to NYU.edu sites, and this is all of NYU.edu as far as we can see with analytics, so that is about 56% come from a search. So the majority of people coming to our website are doing some kind of search online on their own, and they're landing on an NYU page. The next group would be about 34.8%, almost 35%, are direct traffic. Somebody has typed in a URL to come specifically to a page where they bookmarked a URL. So right there is almost all of the traffic from our site. The remaining group is a referral, so a link from another non-NYU site referring to us. So the majority of people are either typing something in because they've seen it, they know it, they bookmarked it, or they're doing a search to get there. To me, that says a whole lot. That says that, you know what, good organization of content, good choices in navigation of your pages is really important because somebody's going to parachute in to a page. It may not be the home page, it may just be a page deep in your site. They need to be able to know how to get back to other things that are relevant and related from the navigation and from the content in your page. That's something really important to think about as you lay out your content. Specifically off of the NYU homepage, we got in that year about just shy of 9 million visits to the homepage throughout the year, and only about 32.3% went through to another page. So people land on it, and then sometimes they'll go off to another page, or people have set that as their page that loads up when they open their browser. So keep in mind that page traffic just at one page may not always mean what you think it means. So it has a large amount of traffic, but you know, if 67.7% drop off right over there, meaning it loaded and then they went off somewhere else, they did a search for something else, or they went to another website that they typed in. So something to think about too is how many people actually pass through and how many people stop and leave.
Yeah. Would NYU Home be part of the leaving?
NYU Home would not. It's authenticated, so it's not with analytics. Now people could have gone NYU Home from there. So yes, this could be a big refer to NYU Home. I don't have that in analytics here, so it drops off from the public website. Yeah, that's an even greater question. So what are you trying to learn? Make sure you know what your analytics are doing there. And 90% of our searches are coming from Google. It's amazing that really Google is the search leader, hands down. Next in line is Bing at like 3.21%, then Yahoo at 2.26, and then the next closest is Baidu at 0.97. So it is the leader in China, and that's going to be growing for us in terms of what we look at, because now that we have Shanghai, that's going to grow a little bit, but it's still never going to reach Google, especially because a lot of our audiences and students there are using Google as well. So I have a number of other stats. Let's see. Some interesting things. Languages. So people set their language, and so as much as can be measured automatically from browser and iOS preferences, we are at just over 90%, so almost 91% using English out of all the locations that traffic us. Now again, since there is the Great Firewall in China, a lot of people proxy to say they're coming from another country, so this could be a little skewed from areas. But the U.S., about 81% of our audience comes from the U.S. The next is China at 1.88%. So we have a huge drop off. So a lot of our traffic, a lot of our information is coming from US-based locations. So I have a couple of other stats you guys want to know. I'm happy to share, but it's important to make sure that when you talk about analytics, it's not an easy, straightforward thing. Just looking at how many page views we got, that may not say enough to really help you be informed and make a choice. It's a number, but you need to make sure that you think about what is your audience you're trying to serve, what do you need them to do, what is a good thing, what is a bad thing, and sometimes just taking time to really dive in and digest all this together can help paint a bigger, better picture.
One stat that I always find a little confusing is the bounce rate, because it seems to me that when a person leaves a site, does that mean that they were satisfied, that they found what they wanted and they left, or they're frustrated and they give up and they left?
You'll never really know. You'll never really know that. I think the only way you can make an educated guess on that is, was there something on that page that you can measure? So if you have a form on a page, or you have an email address and you say, send us an email. So if you have a high bounce rate from that page and you also got a similar number of submissions or emails, then you probably can associate that people completed what you wanted to complete and they were probably successful or happy. Now, if people bounce from page and you have no way of measuring that, and you don't know, you'll never really know if they're satisfied or not. That's the difficult part, and that's what companies are paying lots of money to dive into really nitty-gritty tools. But most of us, what we're doing, it doesn't matter that much. We don't need a conversion rate. The biggest conversion rate we need is we need to have students apply and show up and pay bills. That is the most important conversion we need for us to sustain and keep our jobs here. Everything else is in addition to that, not devaluing anything. But if we have to pick one, those things are happening. There are groups focusing on that. For us, we just need to know, are we doing the best we can to get our messages out there? And are we putting in as much time as we can into that without completely changing our jobs and doing something over the top? Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left to go over your questions. I apologize. We're going to have to rush through these because this room is a hot spot. So I have a feeling there's a meeting happening right after this. But I will send out an email with these slides and these links so you can look at them more. But there was a question about layout advice and like what we considered good layout and example pages. So you have most pages are like a 3-2 template or a 3-1-1 template. I'd say you see that most often. And with those, the 1-1 or the 3-2, those two columns, that's what I mean by the right column versus the main content. And often we'll see people create a long page on their right column, and then their main content is shorter. And that's just something that we try to keep an eye on. It's not always perfect all the time. Sometimes that right content does peak down below its longer than. But visually, it can look very awkward if your main content is short and that right column extends far down. So just trying to keep that in mind and seeing how you can break that up differently.
I'm sorry. And once that page is created, you can't
change the template,
the
right?
I have to go back and start over.
Right.
All these years later, I still have a problem.
No, we agree. Well, that's a pain point, and our developers know. And I think that it would be very helpful to be able to toggle layouts. But yeah, you're correct. Once you choose it, you are locked into it, unless you want to do the nitty gritty of copying and pasting components. But with the 3-2 template, and I feel like the 4-1 template, you can really get a lot out of them, and they often do what you need them to do. And looking at examples is also a really helpful way, like new ideas of how to break space up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk, but there are some departments that are using outside vendors to create their web pages, right? I mean,
There have been some that have used consultants to help shape content.
Global services as an inspiration. Is there someone that's actually creating those pages, the maps, and?
Oh, some of that is unique, kind of one-off stuff that we've helped them. They've had some people help to develop things, and then we either send them out of the CMS or we can help them bring little pieces into a page. But that's.
I bribe you. Nice pages like that.
So I don't know that we're set up to do that, but if you have somebody that can do it, we can help make sure that it shows.
Yeah. And that's where the request form comes in. Yeah. And we mentioned that again and again, but using headers and bold and bolded text can help with that scanning in your layouts. And then also a common thing that we see, people use multiple different types of promos on a page, and it can get very overwhelming quickly. But there are instances, and some of these in the URLs you'll look at later do it well. They use multiple types of promos and it works out. But for example, the square promos, like some are gray panel promos, some are rounded corner promos. Having them on your page, all on your page, may not look the best. So maybe try to stick with one kind of look and feel for your page. Managing shortcut menus and external links. So this is a great question. Use the reference component if you are putting that shortcut menu on multiple pages and you only have to update one section of shortcut links, and use internal linking for CMS pages. If we had more time, I'd go into that specifically, but that's basically navigating using the search tool, not pasting a URL in. And then also schedule link audits with your staff or students if you have student help, because that's the external link factor. Is we don't know what other people are going to do with their links and if they're going to break on our site. And then feedback at the bottom of every page is where we get most of our broken links reported. So users are trying to get a place, they're probably going to let you know when they're unhappy, hey, this is broken, or you can use that internally when you guys are browsing. Column control errors. So some of you have experienced this, moving components around in a column. It is known that moving across columns doesn't work well, but moving up and down does. However, we've experienced that both ways are producing an error. That error is like a fake out because it did move. And if you use your sidekick to select the refresh icon, you'll see that where you moved your component, it did work. Even though it may throw off an error, I think it's a JCR node error, don't be alarmed, just refresh and you're fine, you're good to go. However, we're working on this to make that error go away. So the other one was best practices for promos and reference components. And there's a fill in the blank option at the end. Different. What do you guys think? Different styles of promos. We mentioned that may not all be meant to be on one page. And then using internal links for your CMS pages. And there are a limit of reference components that are allowed on a page. We actually discovered this recently with a user who was using an upwards of, I think, 200 reference components. I mean, I won't get into the specifics, but sometimes, you have to put, this is a course listing issue. So they're having to put all the courses that were being offered in the different sites so students can really specifically see. So I see the need, but I also, we experienced it breaking. So we don't know the magic number, but I'd say like no more than 20. I mean, it's kind of use at your own risk once you start getting up there with the reference component. We had never seen it break before on a page, but it was breaking because there were so many nodes. There were so many reference paragraphs that it did break. So there is a limit there. But reference components, again, using that annotation tool, like I mentioned, is really helpful to note to yourself where you have these things referenced. And also, if you ever try to delete a page in the CMS, you're going to get that warning message that says this is being referenced, and it gives you the specific URLs that's being referenced. You click off to those, see where it is, make sure that you still want to do what you're doing. Or maybe someone in that unit and you contact them, hey, I'm deleting this page, so you're going to have to update it. So it's kind of up to the individual what they want to do from there.
So thank you guys so much for your time, and I apologize that we're kind of having to cut it short, but no one's kicked us out yet. So I feel free to stay around and ask questions if you want to see some more of the analytics that Eric has to offer. Again, we're always here to help, and we definitely, when there are things that frustrate you, they frustrate us. So we are your advocate, and we take those very seriously. And while we cannot always promise things, we definitely try our hardest. So I hope you guys know that, and can always reach out to us with questions, or if you want advice, or just to look at a page and see what we think about it. We're open to that. So yeah, with that, feel free to hang out. Please give us your feedback about today's presentation. I will send up a follow-up email with all the materials that we had today. So yes.
The best way to do what you just described is to go to that request page.
Yeah, if you have a specific request, I would fill out the request form. And
say like, hey, look, here's this page. Will you consult?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great because that goes to Trisha and Sherry, our assistant director, and they're the project managers, so they field things and they say, okay, you know what, this is a Karen thing, this is a Nart thing. He's a recent addition to our team, so it's that's a great way to get those questions answered. Our alias is always open, but we are trying to get better about funneling our specific requests and needs into buckets so we can manage our time better and get back to you guys as quickly as possible. So thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the weather, the nice weather that we have for probably 24 hours.